Welcome, I'm TJ, and this is Tyler from the Troll Patrol, and this is Hammered with Cars. To give a little bit of introduction, the cars that I have are a 1986 Nissan 300ZX NA to turbo. I've been racing that since 2013 in autocross, HPD, and high-speed autocross. Nothing too special about it. It's just got the regular VG30 ET engine, power trick suspension, and a helical LSD in it. Then my daily driver is a 2016 Focus ST with absolutely nothing done to it.
And as TJ said, I'm Tyler, and I've got a couple different vehicles that I race and street drive. My first autocross vehicle is a 2003 GMC Sonoma, stock 2.2 liter, 5-speed, all the power. But aside from the lack in power, it's got a pretty good suspension setup with some Speedway upper control arms, 2-inch lowering spindles, 1-inch lower ball joints, half-inch upper ball joints, good alignment on the front end, and a extended rear axle from a Bravada with a Eaton LSD, disc brakes in the rear end, 3-inch lowering blocks, and some decent shocks. So that's a work in progress. That's actually going to be getting a Rover 4-liter V8 swap this winter. So I can hopefully compete with some of the higher horsepower guys next season.
Sure.
And then the other car would be a 1986 Chevy Corvette. And that thing is all completely bone stock, right down to the Monroe sense of track shocks.
What about cam?
It may have a cam, but I don't really know. Those TPI engines are really known for good torque delivery, so it may be deceivingly fast for what it is. Aside from that, I've got a 2003 Jetta TDI that I use for my street car, and it's got some mods too. It's got a big set of injectors and a good tune, intake and exhaust. So also a work in progress. Happy medium between fuel economy and horsepower.
So I know we've been looking at like UMI and stuff, just the cars that are involved in there, and you were talking earlier tonight about a C10.
Yeah, so I typically wouldn't be the kind of guy that was really that excited about building a C10, but then I ran across this picture of a C10, and that thing gets me all kinds of excited. You know, between the livery of it, just that paint scheme of the red with the black hood and the stance of it, but something about that truck really just makes me interested in building a full-size truck. You know, my S10 being much smaller, I don't know exactly what the weight is on a C10, but like my S10, for example, or my Sonoma rather, once that's into full race prep, when I do the Rover swap, I'm going to be doing some weight reduction on the front end with an aluminum bumper and aluminum core support and AC delete and things of that nature. You know, that truck's going to be down somewhere probably close to the 2,700 pound mark, and I just don't see a C10 being down in that type of a weight range.
Well, if you get it in Wisconsin and it has enough rust,
that's totally true.
Then you'll be in that.
The natural weight reduction. The natural weight reduction.
They don't give you points for the rust, so
right.
That's.
Yep, they definitely assess you some points for obvious weight reduction, but they never count the rust.
See, and I don't think I could do that. If I was I wouldn't get a C10. I'd probably get a C20.
But what I'd want between a C10 and a C20?
C20 is just like a 3/4 ton.
Oh, okay.
And if I couldn't get a C20, I'd get a C10, but I'd be using it as a tow truck. I wouldn't.
Sure. Oh, okay.
It's really no difference in styling at all. It was
Yep.
I'm pretty sure it was just a bigger engine and maybe bigger brakes. I don't know back then if they really had the want or need to put bigger brakes on something that was towing.
No,
like
they
now?
for sure did. You know, my dad's had a couple older trucks over the years. Specifically that I can think of is he's got I think it's a 92. It's 92 or 93 Chevy 3500.
Okay.
And he even mentioned to me that did not have the biggest brake package available on that truck. Given that's not as old as a C10 or a C20, getting back into the 70s
Right.
and 80s. But, I do know that is one of the things that they had different
Right.
in the towing packages
Right,
and things
right.
of that nature, or a camper package or something like that,
Right.
is bigger brakes.
Right.
Back into the 70s, a lot of those trucks had drum brakes on them. So you would have had disc brakes as an available option, or just a larger drum brake.
Right. And I guess the reason I don't know if I would feel bad about turning one into a race truck. Like, I guess I don't have the ambition to turn one into a race truck, but it seems like you can get C20s and C10s for the same price in some place like Wyoming or, Texas, where it's rust-free or practically rust-free for the price of a completely rusted out half-ton or three-quarter ton here in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And at that point, I'd rather just go to Wyoming, buy it, and yeah, the fuel efficiency is going to suck, but to swap in something like an LM7 or something to at least help with the fuel efficiency a little bit would be
Which,
nothing.
I mean, if you're going the route of building a tow rig, you're going to have a little bit more fabrication and stuff involved, but
Right.
with the way that the aftermarket community is right now, there's going to be more and more swap packages, if you will, available
Right.
for different chassis with different engine packages all the time.
Right.
It's becoming more and more common to be able to just find bolt-in parts for older trucks like that, where you can do a Duramax swap or a Cummins swap or something like that.
Right.
So you get all that pulling power with a little bit of horsepower, but tons of torque, with a lot of good bolt-in availability,
Okay.
just from all of the the swap packages and things like that different companies are offering.
Right. Okay. Now, I don't mean to, I guess, change subject here, but now that we're since we're talking about UMI a little bit, and that's more of an autocross-based thing, what would you say are the most overrated autocross cars?
Overrated
seen?
autocross
Now,
cars.
I know we don't see everything, but I mean, we've got a pretty good view of everything. I mean, we've been to Great River Region events, we've been to Milwaukee SCCA events, and
Yep.
other local clubs and stuff, as well as HPD and high-speed autocross events. Which I guess maybe take the HPD and high-speed autocross out of it.
I guess I don't really see quite as many overrated autocross platforms to begin with as I
Okay.
do underrated platforms. You've got the only time you really see overrated platforms is somebody who's kind of stuck in 10 years ago. They're looking at cars that were competitive on like an SCCA Nationals level 10 or 15 years ago.
Or competitive in packs.
Right. Well, yes. That in and of itself is a whole different conversation. But like if you look at SCCA Nationals 10 or 15 years ago, you see cars like a Mini Cooper S or
Okay.
things like that were super dominant in particular classes 10 or 15 years ago that are still classed the same, but they're
no
just
longer
not
competitive
competitive
in
in that class.
Right. Yeah, if you got a Mini Cooper in GS, you're going to be losing to someone in a Focus ST.
Right, but that would assume that they've been demoted to G class. But the Mini Cooper
that's
S
right, they
is
were in
still in
D.
D. The Mini Cooper is still in D.
Were they in
Yeah,
D in 2020 still?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Because I know you had one in 2019. but
Yeah,
not 2020.
it seems like
Okay.
with an overwhelming majority of larger sanctioning bodies, that cars that once were competitive but then rapidly became uncompetitive and people just quit using them, they no longer gain that reoccurring data from the national level competitions to be able to actually demote them in class. So it's kind of like a cliff. Like the car was competitive and then it just drops straight off the face of the earth. So there's no longer that data to suggest that they should be demoted in class.
So how do you compare that to like something like a 350Z, which we've seen move down?
Because I think
it's not like people are using 350Zs on a national level. Is it because they're being used on?
I think that there's enough people using them on a national level, or at least really commonly in a regional level, that data gets to the national sanctioning body that helps them to denote. Whereas like when was the last time, short of a local event, that you went to an autocross and saw a Mini Cooper S? It's just not as common as a 350Z.
That's true.
Like people who are attempting to
at least around us. You're right.
Right.
I think the last time I saw Mini Cooper S was with FVSCC up at Road America.
Yep.
But 350Zs, you almost see one at every event. It feels
Exactly.
like, or
there's a lot of people who, when they're trying to get into the autocross scene, they don't think to themselves, what could I buy that would be really good at racing? I should go buy a Mini Cooper S. No, for the same exact amount of money, they think I should buy a 350Z.
Right.
It's a front-engine rear-wheel drive platform that has a
huge aftermarket.
huge aftermarket support. Not that the Mini Coopers don't have a good aftermarket support, but I feel that the 350Z has a larger aftermarket support, and it's in the racing mind, it's just a better platform to start with.
Right.
It's got more horsepower right off the bat. It's got larger capacity for larger tires and wheels. It has a larger capacity for just handling capabilities in general. Stock to stock, almost guaranteed a 350Z is going to out-handle a Mini Cooper almost every time.
But you still didn't answer the question. What are some of the most overrated?
Overrated. Huh. That's almost a really tough one to really decide because, at least in my experience, you take a platform that in general doesn't really compete that well. You see a lot of people that have subpar times at their autocross or their local track day or their HPDE, and that car just doesn't seem to perform very well because there's a lot of people driving it and it generally has slow times. But then you have that one guy that shows up in the same exact car with very similar specs, and he'll run 2-3 seconds faster on an autocross or 10 seconds faster on an HPDE. So it's a real tough question to answer. To answer your question directly, I personally can't think of a specific car that is super underrated. What do you think? Do you think that there's a car out there overrated? Yes. Do you think that there's a specific car out there that's overrated for autocross?
Yeah. I don't know if I'd go as far to say the NB Miata is. I think the NA Miata is. And I would, it's not only to do with it in autocross. There's part of it is the packs and everything with it, but it's also the price of it.
I mean, like, if you start
you look at
prices on it.
Right. I mean, at least up here in Wisconsin, it's, an NA Miata can cost you, that's in decent shape, can cost you anywhere from $4,000 to $6,000.
Yep.
And there may be nothing done to it. There may be some stuff done to it, depending on mileage and all that.
Yep.
Not that it's not a bad place to start, but I don't, if someone came to me today and said, hey, should I get an NA Miata or a 350Z? I feel like a lot of people would say, get an NA Miata. There's, they're cheap and blah, 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 and all this stuff. There's a ton of aftermarket, which is all true. Well, the parts for it are cheap. Is I guess what would the argument be? Because with the 350Z, you're heavier. You're going to have more consumables and brakes and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's fair. But I mean, with the scope of how the aftermarket is changing, the 350Z is becoming cheaper by the minute.
Right. And I think the way I'd say it is or I'd position it, especially if it was someone getting into it, I'd tell them get a 350Z because let's say you go to an autocross and you really just don't think it's for you, the 350Z is still going to be a better car.
Yep.
And I guess you could go back and say, okay, well, if you're just cruising in the car, maybe a convertible would be better. Well, then get a convertible 350Z because those are even cheaper than 350Zs.
Right. Which the shame is with the convertibles is that they almost come, not entirely, but almost exclusively automatics.
I know.
So
that's how you get a really cheap 350Z is an automatic
for sure. But another thing to consider is, as far as a starting platform, you mentioned somebody who's trying to get into starting autocross. starting with the 350Z compared to an NA Miata can go one of two ways. One, an NA Miata, it's really a driver's car because it doesn't have the horsepower. So it forces you to be a good driver because you don't have the horsepower to make up for the lack of driver ability. However, on the flip side of things, if you're trying to get somebody interested in autocross or racing in general, maybe if they don't have the good driving abilities, if they don't have the driver mod per se, it would be good to start them out in a 350Z so that even if they don't have the driving ability, they at least have the horsepower to make up for some of the difference. It can at least give them that confidence when they're looking at the raw times to be thinking to themselves, I'm not a total slouch. I at least competed close to this NA Miata.
Right.
And then that gives them some room to improve without giving them so much horsepower right off the bat that it's uncontrollable or it's difficult to handle.
But there's always that possibility they show up in a C6 Corvette and end up in last place.
Yeah, I mean, that
So
happens.
it doesn't really matter what car you have at that.
That happens, but I think that's also kind of what I was talking about there with trying to hit the midpoint with a 350Z.
Right.
Because you're not super low on the horsepower end of things.
Right.
But you're not so high, like, a C6. What's the least amount of horsepower that a C6 even came with?
I think it's like 450.
Yeah, C6.
We're professionals.
A C6 horsepower, even in its lowest horsepower trim,
It was 450.
I'm just double checking you here, but I think you might be right.
Of course I'm right. Jesus.
Let's see.
Man.
Wow, this is unhelpful, to say the very least.
It's 450. And if you disagree, put it in the comments.
Well, yeah, I guess we'll
Go back
correct
up
it.
to the top.
I guess we'll
I guarantee
correct it
you
if it's wrong, but
Go back up to the top. Go back. Click on the LS2
well, how do you know that's the least amount of horsepower?
because it's the
it's the
smallest
lowest
engine
displacement?
and it's American. That's how
400.
400.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's 400 instead of 450.
Okay.
Now, that's compared to what's a 350Z for horsepower?
286.
You know that for a fact? That
I
sounds like
do.
a lot more exact number than a 450.
I'm almost 100%.
So, in a platform
Or it's like 268. It might be one of the other.
It's really close, either way. So, when you're in two chassis that are very comparable in weight, but
Right.
one has 40%, well, actually, it's probably close to 60% more horsepower than the other. It gives you enough horsepower to kind of make up for some driving ineptitude.
Right.
Without giving you so much horsepower that when you're not prepared for it, you can't control it properly. So I think that a 350Z is really a good starting platform or something similar to a 350Z. That front engine, rear drive, middle of the road horsepower, not low
Right.
horsepower, not high horsepower.
Right.
It really just helps you. My cat outside.
I don't know. All right.
Anyways,
So we had a cat at the door. Took care of that.
it was a catastrophe.
So I don't know, like that. I know, I say the NA Miata is a little overrated. I've never driven one though. I've always wanted to drive one to see exactly what you're talking about. How you have to rely on the driver more to keep the speed up because you can't
sure.
stop as much. But that's also one of the things I don't like about the Miata because it's used as this like baseline, and that's kind of going back to packs. It's that idea of, okay, this guy's in this slower car, but he did this time in this slower car, so let's add this modifier to make it faster. But you could take him and stick him in an SM car and he's gonna run like shit because he has no idea how to handle.
No,
power.
for sure. Yeah, I mean, as far as driver ability and driver understanding of a particular car, a person who is super comfortable in a 100 or 120 horsepower car that weighs 2,500 pounds compared to somebody who drives a car that's 2,800 pounds, so very
Right,
close in
right.
weight relatively speaking,
Right.
but has say 400 horsepower. That person is going to feel super out of place,
Right.
if they don't have cross-platform experience, really.
Right.
So and I can attest to that personally, really, because driving my S10,
Right.
that thing only having 100 to 120 horsepower and weighing approximately 31 to 3,200 pounds.
Right. Starving itself of oil on bank corners.
It happened once. So what happens when you can pull all them lateral
Right.
G's. But, driving that sort of a vehicle, it's just pedal to the metal all the time. It has way more grip than it has power. You can almost never overcome that grip that it has. It feels balanced even if it's not, because it doesn't have enough power to show you that it's unbalanced.
Right.
But then, for example, when I jumped into your car, very similar in weight, right around that 3,000 pound mark, if I remember correctly.
Right. And about twice the horsepower and probably
3 times the torque.
torque.
Yep. And I couldn't keep that thing going in a straight line to save myself the first
right.
time I jumped in it.
Right. In fact, you almost killed 2 people.
Just about. That one time I backed right up to a corner worker. Yeah, well, maybe have.
And it's not a cam car.
But yeah, racing in autocross, racing in general, is just a weird thing. There is the driver mod, but then there's also the driver mod. You can be super tuned into your specific platform or your chassis, your individual car. But then there's also people who can just jump right into almost any car and be competitive right off the bat.
Right.
Because those people have a lot of experience, they have a lot of multi-platform experience, and they just know how cars in general work.
Right. So if you had, let's say, if you had 10 grand right now, and you could go and buy something for autocross, high-speed autocross, track days, that kind of thing, what would you go out and buy?
Do I have to buy the vehicle and leave it the way it is, or can I buy and modify it with my 10 grand?
I would say you can buy and modify it. I mean, that's at least for us, that's a big part
Sure.
of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like that's, especially with autocross, there's a big part of it is buying the car and not just leaving it alone. Even if you are building it to a class, you usually want to do something to it. I mean, it's one. Even if you buy a car that's, say, built for a class, you're not going to just leave it alone. You're not going to want to. You're going to want to try and improve it no matter what.
Yep. Boy, if I had 10 grand, I'd be pretty hard pressed. This comes back to my own personal experience. If I had 10 grand, I'd be pretty hard pressed not to buy another C4 for $2,500 or $3,000 and put $7,000 worth of suspension mods into it.
You'd be hard pressed not to?
Correct. Yeah, because I think that is a highly underrated vehicle. So if I had
buy a C4,
no, I
you
would.
would. Okay,
yep,
sorry.
I'd be hard pressed not to buy another.
Gotcha.
Yeah, because I think that's a super underrated platform. We're talking track cars here, so you're not looking for a show car. It doesn't have to be super nice interior. It doesn't have to be a super nice exterior. It just has to be mechanically sound in the drivetrain. We'll say it has to have a good engine, a good transmission, a good differential, because those are the expensive things that I can't
so then
fix.
maybe let's expand that a bit to an all-around car. So something you could take to the track, take to the autocross. Know you're going to be able to drive it home, but it's also something that you wouldn't mind driving. Let's say, if it was a C4, you wouldn't mind driving it to the Corvette Museum in Kentucky. Yeah, Bowling Green, Kentucky.
Yeah.
Yep, you wouldn't mind driving it into Kentucky, and it would be a comfortable or at least tolerable ride.
Yeah, I mean, you know,
Well, I guess the
a
question
C-
is, would it change? Would it change what you would get? Would it
No.
change you from getting a C4? Or
No,
would it
I don't
be-
think so. Because
Okay.
the thing is about a C4 is if you buy a C4 in stock trim, no matter how nice it is, like you could have a 10,000-mile C4, but if it has all stock suspension, they ride like a lumber wagon.
Right.
They're not
right,
a,
right,
they're not
right.
a they're not
Yep.
a luxury car,
Right.
you know. But the thing is if you get rid of that leaf spring suspension and you update your bushings and you go with a nice set of, say, double adjustable shocks so that
Right.
you can tune the dampening down to make them ride a little nicer,
Right.
you can actually make a C4 so that it actually rides pretty decent.
Right.
So, you know, it's not uncommon to be able to buy we'll say ratty, but not trashed out.
You can
but,
get an automatic C4 for $2,500
oh
pretty
yeah,
easily.
yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
And that's the thing with C4s is just being able to find a manual. First of all, they're not as common
Right.
as the
You'd be better
automatics.
off at that price. You'd almost probably be better off getting an automatic.
Yeah,
Because I think with the manual, you're almost going to spend $4,000 or more, unless you're. I mean, especially if you start looking
Yeah.
at the LT1s, which I think.
yes, if you want to be up in the later C4s with the LT1s, you're definitely going to be looking at a little bit more money.
Right.
But you know, even so, I mean, look at how my completely stock, basically C4 has done this past season here.
At what, like 2 races?
Oh, come now! I had it at 4 or 5. I actually made a pretty good showing in the C4 this year, but you know, considering how the suspension is all completely stock, that car really surprised me a lot.
Okay.
It was way better than I really ever expected, and you know, even if you had to spend $4,000 or $5,000 for that additional $5,000, you could, even if you had to maintain the leaf spring suspension, you could do all poly bushings and a really good set of shocks and a really good set of tires and wheels. You know, you can fit 305s or 315s under that body
Right,
with no
right,
modifications
right.
whatsoever. So you can get really, really good tires on that chassis.
Right.
And, you know, if you have really good double adjustable shocks, all fresh bushings and everything's moving the way it's supposed to, they have enough adjustability in the suspension to be able to get a good alignment set up for track use. I really think that, at least at local events, that could be a highly competitive car. Even at regional events, I think that it could be really good. Without taking one personally to a national level, I couldn't really say for sure.
Right.
You know, we were talking about UMI earlier. There was a C4 that is
Right. That has an LS7 in it. Is that right?
It's some sort of an LS motor,
Right.
but it's not like a crazy high horsepower build either. It's fairly mild in the way of
Yeah, like-
LS motors.
Like 600, 500 horsepower.
Yeah, I think it's somewhere around that 500 horsepower mark because it's still naturally aspirated, but it's not
Yes.
a full tilt build.
Yeah.
You know, and that guy.
Just a modest 500, 600 horsepower.
Yeah, well, you know, in today's world of
I
LS
know,
motors
I know,
and turbochargers,
especially with LS.
600 horsepower means nothing.
I know.
But you know, at what I would consider to be a pinnacle national level event for UMI King of the Mountain, that car placed really, really well.
Right.
And that is After Dark Speed is who.
Right.
Yeah.
Because did he place 4th overall or something like that?
Yeah.
That's right. Was there 2? Because originally the one I was thinking of was the silver one with the wing, but that's Optima Ultimate Street Car that guy's been
Right.
racing in.
And he may have been at UMI also. I'm
Right.
not 100% sure.
Sorry, we don't know any of these drivers' names.
Let's see here. But the guy that took it out there is the owner of After Dark Speed.
Right.
And he's also the driver.
It's also... Oh, so he does have an LS in it. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, see... I think...
Well, he also made it to the
Optima.
Circuit of the Americas. Yep.
But he did that in a C5? Is what it looks like?
Yep. He also has a C5 that he's doing development on.
Okay. See, I think if I had 10 grand and I could go buy a car right here and now, I'd probably go buy 240Z.
Yeah.
Because regardless of how it does, I could sell it for 20 grand.
I mean, that's fair. That's fair. Not to take away from your 240Z comments, but back to that C4 that went to UMI. He actually was the first place vintage qualifier. So for the older class of cars, he placed first place in the vintage qualifiers, but then he was actually third place overall out of the 32 car shootout in the showdown.
And that's who?
Let me see if I can get his name here.
It didn't say in that post. Okay.
No, it didn't.
No worries. Yeah, no, I think
Ryan Matthews is
Ryan
his name.
Matthews. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think the C4 is not only underrated in its performance, I think it's underrated in its looks. I actually like it.
Yeah, I do too. I mean,
I like the way the C5 looks up front. I hate the way the C5 looks at the back. I hate the oval taillights. And it's
you like them round taillights, so you like the early C4s.
Yeah, you're right. I don't even like. You're right. I don't like the
ones.
late C4s with the square, rounded square taillights. I like the round, and the C6 is easily my favorite Corvette as far as modern Corvettes go.
Sure.
Just because of how the rear end looks, and I mean the front is good looking too, but the rear is like the best part of it. And the C7 isn't bad.
I was gonna say,
but
you
again,
don't like that C7.
No, the C7 is fine, and it's not like it's grotesque to me like the C5 is. The C5 is like grotesque to me. Would I buy a C5? Yeah, I could see buying a C5 someday, but it'd be purely for performance reasons. And every time I look at the rear of the car, I'd want to play Russian roulette with myself because I couldn't believe I bought such an ugly looking car.
Well, you just have to park it in the garage forwards,
Yes.
so that you only ever have to walk past the front. As long as you never go around the back, you'll be fine.
Well, that'd be the good thing is when people are looking at your taillights, they have to look at the bad part.
Yeah, well, on the bright side, when you pass them on the track, they'll look at the back end and go, "Ugh," and it'll mess up their next lap, so you can get farther ahead.
There you go. No, I really like the C6 and even the C4. I think the C4 looks really good. At least the early C4s. I just like the rear a lot. And the C3 again, the C3 looks good as well, but it also has the round taillights. I just don't like I don't like the oval, and I don't like the square. And I think I like the C7 more than like the C5 and the late C4s, specifically because they don't try to be some variation of round. They're just
they're
square.
They're
rectangular.
They're very angular.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah.
They're not round. They're not an oval. They're not a rounded square.
Right.
They're just clearly angular.
Right.
So what you're telling me is that you like round taillights because you like Nissans, because you like the Godzilla. You like the Skylines.
See, that's the thing though. Like,
so you're telling me that
if I was gonna get a Skyline, the Skyline I'd get would be the R31 Skyline, which is very 80s boxy styling taillights, classic 80s taillights.
So you're not often thrown off by early
Impalas.
2000s Impalas?
No. But so like the other thing with the 240Z is you've got a ton of aftermarket for it, and you wouldn't really be able to get it. But like you've got groups like Apex Engineered where they have made completely new independent rear suspensions and independent front suspensions. If that's how you want to say it, where it completely gets rid of the old suspension design, and now they're double A-arm suspension designs.
Sure.
And I think that package is almost
Were they a strut design in the front?
They're a McPherson strut design in the front, and the rear is very similar to like the Z31. It's not exactly
like a trailing arm type
setup.
setup.
It's not exactly like that, but it's very close. It might even be considered a McPherson strut design in the rear, because I'm pretty sure the spindle...
This is an R32 you're talking about?
No. This is the S32 240Z that I'm talking about.
okay.
I can't remember if the rear has I think the rear has like its own hub and everything connected to the shock absorber and everything, if I'm not mistaken. Go to that. That looks pretty close. Yep. Yeah, so your hub.
Yeah. So it's for sure a McPherson.
Yep. And so they have these kits that basically convert the entire car over to a double A-arm style suspension.
Sure. So it must be a whole new subframe and everything.
Oh yeah, it is.
Yep.
And that system is like $9,000, so that obviously isn't something you could afford in a $10,000 car. But
Unless you get it for free $99.
well, yeah, I don't think that's gonna happen. The car, or you buy a complete rust bucket that doesn't matter.
Back to that Wisconsin rust bucket aspect.
Right. Lightweight. 240Z Superleggera, isn't that how they? So no, but I like. I don't know. That's to me. That's one of the like peak automotive driving experiences is the 240Z, and I am definitely biased for Z cars.
Clearly.
But if I had $10,000 to spend on a car, it would be one of those.
Yeah, I mean, as far as complete driver experience cars goes, you go back into that 70s and early 80s Japanese cars or even European cars.
Right.
They're not high horsepower. I mean, for their day, they were moderately high horsepower, but
well, I mean, it was 100.
The biggest thing is that they were, for their day, very good handling chassis, super lightweight.
So I guess I'm going to tie this into our overrated cars. You can get an NA Miata for like $6,000 and it'll be clean. You could get an S30, maybe not as clean as that NA, for $6,000, and it's going to have an engine that was rated at 160 horsepower, and it weighs 2,200 pounds.
Which is actually less than a Miata.
Exactly. Like,
yep.
Get the Datsun.
Yep.
That's why I'd get a Datsun.
Yeah, I mean, I can't argue with that point for sure.
All right. So I guess one of the things I also wanted to talk about was we've got a lot of new cars coming out currently, specifically the Nissan Z car.
Sure.
The new one is coming out that they call the Proto Z, and then the Subaru BRZ.
Okay.
I don't know how much you've looked into.
I've seen a little bit of the updates on the BRZ. It's got an updated, a little bit of a facelift.
Yes.
Yep.
I would say it's gotten quite a bit of a facelift.
I've heard some mixed reviews on that. Some people don't like it. Some people do. The only thing I can remember about it is looking at the rear end and thinking how much it looks like a new Supra.
Oh, really? I guess I need to take a better look at the rear end. I heard people talking about it looking like a Civic on the rear.
What Civic?
Which I know I was about to say, I really don't care what the rear looks like, as I just got done ranting about how the C5 looks like shit from the rear. It does, one of the things that I had, looking at this is one person had said, it looks like a Porsche up front.
I don't know about that.
You don't think that looks like a Porsche up front?
No, I think it looks like an RX-8.
No. What? No, it doesn't look, no, I think it, I see where people are talking about it looking like a Porsche. It does not look like an RX-8. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, it does.
What are you, blind?
them headlights and that grill looks a little bit like an RX-8.
Here's an RX-8.
A little bit.
Okay. A little bit.
More than it does a Porsche. Porsches have round lights.
No, they don't.
But here's that rear end picture that I was talking about, where it kind of looks like a Supra. It looks like a Supra.
I think it looks more like an NSX taillight, to be honest.
You want to know what it looks like? Is a late model Buick Regal.
That's obscure. It looks more like an NSX taillight. Okay, maybe there's a 2018 Porsche Cayman.
A Cayman, maybe a little bit like a Cayman.
Look at that.
Yeah,
they are identical.
No, not identical.
Oh,
it's a little bit like a Cayman.
It looks more like an NSX rear taillight, if you ask me. But more importantly, I want new NSX rear taillight. More importantly about the Subaru is the power levels.
Which have come up, correct?
That is correct. They've come up a little bit. Not a ton. I believe, well, actually, I guess it depends on how you define a ton. It's actually jumped up quite a bit from where it was on the original, because the original was like, what? It was 200 bhp,
Yeah.
which
so we're gonna
translated
have
to about like 180 horsepower, if I remember correctly.
We're going to have to talk about percentage ratings here. Like, how much has it gone up in a percentage?
I
Well,
believe
this is
the
actually
new,
a 2022 model, not a 21.
well, no, I don't think that's right. I think that's, I'm not sure. Let me see when that was written. Oh, that was 20.
Scroll back down a little.
I don't think that's right. Oh, 2.4 liter.
228 horsepower.
Produced around 260 or naturally
Oh.
aspirated 217. I thought they were saying, oh, okay, 220. I say I thought it was around 224 is what I had last seen,
Sure.
is what was being described. And I believe the previous BRZ was 200 to 205
Sure.
bhp. So
So, I mean, in a percentage basis, that's actually like a 10% increase in horsepower, which actually is nothing to sneeze at.
no, it's not. It's not. But it's better than nothing. Yeah. Okay. So you're right. About a 10% increase.
Yep.
I think what's bothered me more about the car than anything is not the car itself. It's people's reactions to the car.
Well, I've just heard a lot of people slamming it
Right. And
for
it
the way
bothers.
it looks.
So I never judge a car by how it looks anymore, because if you've ever seen a picture of a Z31, it looks terrible. But then you get in front of it and you're
Yeah.
like, okay,
Yep. I mean,
I like this. That's exactly what happened. I was looking for a 240 SX is what I really wanted. And then my dad found a Z31. He's like, well, why don't you just go and check it out? It's
Sure.
rear wheel drive, go check it out. So I went and looked at it, and it surprised me, because I looked at the cars and I thought, wow, these things are ugly as they can be.
Yep.
And then I went and looked at one, and it completely changed my mind. And then that's why I basically ended up with one,
Sure.
especially after riding in one. And I could see the same thing happening with this, because I look at it and I don't particularly think it looks amazing, but I don't think I'd be disappointed with it as how
Right.
it drives. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not going to be super
I mean-
fast by any means. I mean, I hope they don't. It doesn't look like they changed the body overall too much, so my hope is that the weight hasn't changed any.
Right. Yeah. If it has a huge weight increase,
Right.
that could be detrimental.
Because as far as
It
goes,
could totally offset that horsepower increase.
right. You look at STX class cars, and they're running at, it's a car rated at 200 bhp, and you've got STX cars running at 200 wheel horsepower.
Yep.
So now you think about, okay, if you get a BRZ up to that 224 or 230 wheel horsepower, that could be a pretty fun car.
Right.
That could be.
I mean, there's nothing bad to be said about a BRZ to begin with. I think that's another one of those underrated cars, at least at a local level. I know that people have been totally kicking butt with them on a national
Right,
level,
right.
just based on how they're classed and
Right.
seeing results
Well, even
from
locally,
national
we've
level
seen
events.
how
Well, now
well set up.
you have to be cautious about that, because at the beginning of the season, and especially last season we seen tons of BRZ guys out there.
Right.
BRZs, A86s, and FRSs. There's more than enough of them out there, and we were kind of like,
Right.
they were nothing exciting.
Right.
People weren't doing much in them, but then we had one or two guys show up later in the season that were kind of like, all right, they're putting down some pretty decent times. And then this year especially, we've had a couple of guys,
Right.
specifically that one guy at FVSCC.
His name starts with an E, and he knows. People know who he is if they're from Wisconsin.
Yeah. That car is not like super jacked up on horsepower.
Right.
It just has the appropriate mods to really take the advantage
Right.
of its handling capabilities
Right.
for that platform. And that car, with that driver anyways, is blindingly fast.
Well-
and there's even a fair scattering of other cars that aren't as heavily modded that are just really quick on an autocross
It could be
course.
argued that not only was the driver good, but the car was good because his co-driver, I think he was about a half second
Sure.
behind
Which
the owner, I believe.
Which
he still placed second overall
Yeah.
through the day, and this was with 153 drivers.
Yep. Which, given a half second on a
It was a 40-second course.
40-second course,
Yep.
it is a lot,
Right.
really. But like you said, even the co-driver at a half second,
Right,
slower,
and I don't know.
I
don't know enough about the co-driver to know how experienced he is or anything. But the fact that they were both consistently ahead of everyone is a sign that the car is set up very well.
Yep, absolutely. But I really truly think that the BRZ is another one of those underrated cars because, as this season has proved, there's enough people out.
I wouldn't go as far to call it underrated. I mean, it has an entire spec series with SCCA.
Right. So I
would
guess
not call
on
it
a national level, I don't think it's that highly underrated. But I think at least in our local area,
level,
it's pretty underrated.
I guess I would agree with that. I just think people on the local level aren't necessarily doing what the guys on the national level
Right,
are.
for sure. I mean,
Now
think about
And maybe that's just in our area specifically.
think about Reed from our Troll Patrol group.
Yep.
In his 350Z, that is very mildly modded. It doesn't have a lot.
It doesn't have
done
any
to
power
it.
mods. It's just
Yeah.
suspension.
It doesn't have a lot done to it. Think about how many BRZs, FRSs, and AE86s that he beat before one beat him.
I would double check with him.
In the earlier years, like
I would double check.
2-3
I would
years
double
ago.
check with him because I know he talked about how he struggled to beat some of those guys sometimes.
This year or years past?
Years past.
Well, I
he
guess
barely
I'd have
raced
to-
this year. Reed,
Yeah.
we're disappointed in you.
Yeah. I guess I would have to talk to him, but I do for sure remember him beating a lot more of them than beat him.
Okay, that may be, but I know he was. I remember him talking enough times about how he was surprised he'd get beat by an FRS because they are so far down on power.
Right. Yep. Well, it's all about that handling.
Right.
I mean, and a lot of it comes down to the driver mod too. I can't say anything bad about Reed driving his Z. He does
Right.
a good job. But as we just discussed, he didn't race a lot this year, so some seat time would do him well.
Are you listening, Reed?
But that just goes back to it depends on who's in the car. Somebody who is a national level driver,
Right.
in an under horsepowered car or even a nail handling car,
Right.
could outdo somebody who is just a moderate level driver.
Right. So then the next new car that I brought up was the new Z car that Nissan has, which is the Proto Z that has been coming out. And again, going back to the BRZ a bit, one of the things that bothered me was the way people critique these cars.
Sure.
Is because people want these rear-wheel drive sports cars, and then a manufacturer comes out with them, and then they just
Rag them.
Yep, they just crap all over them, and it drives me nuts because you have to remember they do have to meet they have to meet a budget, and they have to meet some kind of return on investment.
Yep.
For the car. And then probably the second thing that bothers me the most about the Proto Z is everyone is thinking it's coming out with the VR30 DETT, which came out in the is it the Q60S Infinity or Q65? Yeah, it was the Q60, which had the 3-liter twin turbo option, which is the VR30 DETT, and you have so many people who are assuming because it makes 400 horsepower that it's going to be the 400Z,
Sure.
going off of 350Z, 370Z, and so they're thinking 400Z is the next step, when really it should be a 300ZX.
Yeah, absolutely.
Based on
their historical
Right.
lineage, it should go by displacement,
Right.
not by horsepower.
Right. And the only thing I could see as far as renaming goes, if they were going to name it something other than a 300ZX, if it has a 3-liter engine. They haven't actually confirmed, as far as I know, that it's actually going to be the VR30 DETT.
Right.
But if they're not going to go based off the liter size of the engine, the other name that they could go to that would make sense is just to call it a Fairlady Z and just call it that from this point on. That's what it was originally called in Japan. They could just run with that name for the end of time.
Right.
And it wouldn't matter what displacement, what power it is, or whatever.
Sure.
But overall, I think it's a great looking car, in my opinion. I know there's been a few critiques about the bumpers and things like that.
Yep.
The rear taillights I know have gotten a lot of critique as people not liking them, and
About how it looks like a Mustang prototype.
that's what people have said. But what it is more of an homage to is the Z32 300ZX, which also leads me to think, which also makes me think it's dumb people are calling it a 400Z because they're already showing bits of a previous 300ZX in it.
Right.
So it'd make more sense they'd go back to the 300ZX name.
Yeah, very possibly. But, also the headlights are kind of a little bit supposed to look like the 240 to 280Zs.
Right.
So
Right. It's supposed to go back to that natural.
Along with that, general side silhouette is also supposed to look more like the classic cars
Right.
as well.
Right. Which is exactly what people have wanted for quite a while, and they get it, and they immediately crap all over it.
Yep.
One of the things I do like is, if I can pull up the interior. And I like the interior not because it's anything new. In fact, if anything, it's old, which is why I like it.
Just simple.
Well, you can see here, you have that center hump.
Yep, and that seat looks a lot like the 350Z.
Exactly.
seat.
It goes back to the 350Z.
Yep.
You also know the inner door handles.
Yep,
Those
those
are
also
exactly
look
like the
very
350Z. Exactly. And then you have these AC controls and stuff, which are still dial. It's not controlled
Yep.
by your touchpad up there.
Right. Same with those 3 gauges across the dash. That's also kind of 350Z, right?
Right. Well, that's even in the 240Zs and stuff.
Oh,
that's
okay.
that's been in Z cars ever since. So the 240Z had, I believe it had 3 dials, and then I think they went to 2 dials on the dash for the 280ZX, and then the Z31, they definitely went to 2 dials.
Yeah, those 3 gauges across the center
Right.
are almost exactly like a
Right.
350Z.
I don't, the Z32 interior, yeah, the Z32 interior actually did not have the gauges, which is actually kind of more of an oddity than anything else.
Yep.
Because everything up to that point had gauges. Yeah, that's a 280Z.
Well, this one here must be
Yeah, the
an
280Z
aftermarket gauge cluster with those 3
that
great
doesn't
big
even-
gauges.
That's not even a.
Oh yeah,
That's not a
not even
350Z. I'm not sure what that is. But even the 280ZX had 3 gauges. So the 3 gauges has been a pretty standard Z car thing. And they went down to 2 for the Z31, and then the Z32 they got rid of it, and then they
Right.
brought it back.
Yep.
My hope is that with seeing all the old or already in use Z car parts in this, is that this thing is going to be, again, more of an affordable car.
Sure.
I mean, that was the big thing with the 350Z is when that came out, you know, it was around the same price of the BRZ is now, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
When
Which,
it came out.
considering the type of market that they're trying to get into for that front engine, rear drive, it's not super high horsepower, theoretically. I mean, it certainly could be with the
VR30 DET.
Yep.
Yep.
It
It would be a
certainly
400
could be.
horsepower platform.
Which isn't super high horsepower, but
No.
but in the way of modern sports cars, it's decent.
I think it will be 400 horsepower simply because they've slowly increased the power every time they've built the Z car.
Sure.
And with the 370Z, you're at 330 horsepower. So you've got to make that next leap. And I'm sure this thing has, I mean, it's going to have stability control, airbags, and all that stuff that weighs cars down.
Yep. So you got to keep that horsepower up to keep the
performance up. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be surprised if it's not at least somewhere around the 400 horsepower number.
Sure.
Just to keep up with that increased power level that they've had.
Absolutely. But that's not to say that they won't have multiple trim levels where, they have.
Right, especially like they've talked.
What'd you say a
Supra,
370Z was?
330.
330 horsepower. So it's not to say that they won't have a base model naturally aspirated car that is somewhere around the 300 horsepower mark to keep that price down.
Right. Well, and that would kind of, it would be interesting. I don't know if they will. Looking at it from a manufacturing standpoint, how much does it cost to have two options compared to just having one option? And how does that look on paper?
Sure.
But again, if you go back to the 300ZX, and if you were going to do another, if you're going to do a third gen 300ZX, both 300ZXs beforehand, the Z31 and Z32 had NA and turbo options.
Right.
Which I think would be cool because I think if you did have an NA option, could you be starting to get into that market where the, Miata is and where the BRZ are at, but potentially with something that's a little bit higher horsepower?
Yep.
That would be pretty cool.
Yep. Which I know that it would potentially take away from the classic standard of a Z, like a 350Z or a 300ZX, having the name related to what the displacement is. But they could do a smaller engine option that is turbocharged, say like a 2.5 liter V6 or something odd like that. That was turbocharged. So it might only make 300 horsepower in a base model or 280 horsepower in a base model. But then they could easily have a ramped up version.
Right.
That would be the same engine, just with a better tune on it, a larger turbocharger, better supporting mods from the factory. That would make it 350 or even 400 horsepower.
Which then at that point it'd make more sense to name it a Fairlady Z.
Right.
Because then it doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I don't know. I definitely think there's going to be a cheaper option because, I mean, the prototype that they showed, has, 6-piston front brakes on it. Does a car really need 6-piston front brakes? No,
absolutely
I mean,
not.
even
But
the
I mean,
370Z Nismos and stuff didn't come out
Yep.
with stuff like that. They had 4 pods in front.
But you know as well as anybody that as far as prototype cars go, they try to show off the best of everything they have. They don't say, hey, here's a base model and we're going to have better ones later. They say, hey, look at what we're going to have. And then for all you cheap people, here's what else we have.
Well, when they revealed this car, they said this is a prototype. But this is 90 to 95% complete.
Right.
As in, this is what the car is going to be.
Right.
So that is the expectation. If they come out with something that doesn't look like this, I think people are going to be pretty upset with it, and that's going to kill them more than anything.
Sure.
Not so much the power. They haven't really said what it's going to be.
Right, it's all speculation
Right,
at this point
right,
as far
right.
as what actual drivetrain options goes.
Right.
The only thing that they've really suggested that they're close to completion on is the aesthetics.
The aesthetics and the fact that it'll have a manual.
Yep. Which are both good things.
Right.
And I mean, you know, compared to things of the past, as far as concept cars go, you know as well as anybody that concept cars are usually wildly outlandish, and they're like, look
Right.
what we could do if we
Right.
wanted to.
Right, exactly.
But then the actual production car comes up far, far different. Perfect example of that is going back to like the, what is it, SN95 Mustang, or is it an SN95 Mustang? Is that the like 94 to 98?
Yeah, the SN95 is the 94 to 98, and then the
Yeah.
new age is the 99 to 2004.
Yep. I'm trying to think of.
They have a specific prototype you're thinking
Oh
of? Or?
yeah. It was early in the 90s.
So do 91 prototype.
That one right there.
Oh, so it looks like a Tiburon.
Kind of, yeah. Oh, where'd that go? That didn't work out at all.
You hit the wrong thing.
Apparently.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, it looks
Yeah.
like a Tiburon.
Yep.
Which actually, you know what it does look like? Especially you start looking at these, like if you, that picture right there, that looks like the current gen Mustang.
Like the hood shape.
Yes.
Yep, a little bit. Yep.
It does.
The hood shape, it does a little bit. Those individual cockpit seats.
Well, no, that's like T-Bird stuff from
Yeah.
the 60s that.
You know what it looks like is it looks like C1 Corvette seats.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's definitely some prototypes out there that were so far-fetched. I mean, look at those Mustang prototypes
Right.
where they look like a
Dodge Daytona
Dodge
up front.
Daytona,
Yeah.
but way smaller, clearly. You know, that
Right.
That
That
looks
looks like a
more-
Miata almost with a Dodge Daytona front end on it.
that size and with that long rear trunk, what that actually looks like is like a Porsche 914 type size.
Okay. Yep. No, you're right.
Yep. But with that American Dodge Daytona pointy nose aerodynamic styling,
Right.
it almost looks like kind of a combination of a Dodge Daytona and a Stingray Corvette, is what it looks like.
Right. Well, I think maybe the best thing right now is, to just hope that Nissan doesn't screw it up. I mean, I know a lot of people gave Toyota crap for the Supra,
Yeah,
which I think it's a really good looking car. Having
Yeah,
seen one in person as well.
for sure.
Obviously, everyone was bummed by the fact that it doesn't have a manual.
Yep.
I'm not sure if that's the end of the world with the car. I think it's more unfortunate that they released the car and then right after that, the C8 was announced for essentially
The same
a
kind
couple
of money.
grand more, maybe. Yeah.
Very similar price
Which it
bracket.
isn't selling for. It's selling for well above that right now, but I don't think it helped Supra anymore.
No,
that it-
for sure. I mean,
Right.
dramatically better performance specs for similar money.
Right.
Yep.
So I guess looking back on things, overrated car.
Still unknown.
NA Miata for me. C10, you think would be a good, it'd be a fun
I mean,
autocross build?
if I was gonna build another truck, another interesting concept that I've seen come about lately is just square body Chevy trucks,
Right,
which would be late 80s or into the early 90s.
right.
Early and mid 90s actually. Right now, that's the cheap truck to build, but beyond that, it's hard to beat a C10. But the C10s are starting to get more and more expensive. So
Right. And I'd rather, I think, I don't
I-
want to say it's a waste, but, build it for
I
towing.
mean, it just
and
depends on
use
about.
it to tow your race cars
I
around.
tell you what, if I'm gonna build a tow rig right now, what I would really be highly inclined to do if I had no budget limits or even a moderate budget limit and I was going to build an epic tow rig, I would find a later 2000s Chevy Duramax 3/4 or 1-ton truck that was like in a rollover accident. So the cab, all the body panels, just straight trash, straight junk.
And you'd swap it into a C20 or something?
Then I would probably buy like a 40s or 50s 1-ton truck.
Okay.
And put that body on that chassis.
Yep.
You get those ultimate classic looks with all of the best of the current towing capacity abilities.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of good things to be said about the way that the full-size truck industry is going right now. You know, you've got, especially when you get into the last 5 to 7 years here, you've got trucks that are all the way up right at or even over 1,000 pound-feet of torque from the factory.
Right.
And even if you just go back to that 10-year mark, you've still got trucks that are in that 600 pound-feet of torque, which is more than adequate for most people.
Right, exactly.
So if you really like having something super unique in the way of a tow rig, you can get that super classic body styling with a vintage body on a modern chassis if you were to go that way. And if you know, I've been thinking about purchasing a truck for my business.
Right.
And just out of curiosity, drive around to some dealerships, and you know, when I see what the things on the lot that I like, I like the leather interior. I like the touchscreen display in the center console with navigation and all the fancy features. I like the heated and cool seats and all that junk. But when you consider buying a new truck, well, if you want all those amenities,
it's like an 80 grand.
It's like $80,000+.
Right.
And even if you step down a trim level or two, you're still talking at least 60.
Right.
You know, whereas if you buy a wrecked truck that is 10 years old, but the drivetrain and the chassis and everything is all still straight, you know, you can pick that up for 10 grand.
Right.
And then you can pick up a full-size chassis a full-size vintage truck that is a viable candidate for a restoration or something like that, and take that body and put it on your new chassis. You can pick that up for 5 grand, so you're at 15. Yeah, given it takes you a lot of intensive labor to make it
about
all
30
happen.
grand all in all.
But for the same amount of, for the same amount of money or less, plus your labor, you have something that's super unique that nobody else has.
Right.
You know, you can end up with some really cool stuff that way
Right.
if you've got the abilities and facilities to make it happen.
Right. And if you had 10 grand, you'd buy a C4 for your...
I'd probably buy, if I wasn't going to buy a C4, I can't think of something else that would make me equally as happy, because I like V8s.
Okay, that's fair.
That I would be able to put the similar amount of money into and end up with a similar performing car.
Right.
If I had to just buy something that was 10 grand and expect it to perform properly, I'd be looking into something a little more late model.
Right.
But
okay,
you know, for 10,
I mean, because you can get a C5 for that.
I was gonna
price.
say, for 10 grand, you can buy a. But the thing is short of the horsepower, there's really not huge advantages in a C5 over a C4 as far as performance ability goes. At least from my research, anyways.
Okay, I was gonna say you'd know more than me. I'm not gonna make that claim.
Yeah. No, that is particularly why I think that the C4 is so heavily underrated, is because
it's just overlooked by the C5.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. And especially with the way that prices are right now, I think that like C5s. They have a range of price, but if you can get one for under $10,000, it's gonna have its problems.
Right.
But then on the high end of C5s, it's going to be like super low miles, and it's going to be a Z06.
Yep.
And it's going to have all the right options that you
Right.
already want,
Right.
and it's going to be 20. So there's a $10,000 price spread.
Right. C4s are.
But there's a definite difference in
Right.
what you're getting.
Right.
Whereas with C4s, you know, you've got the ratty ones in the low end that are going to have its problems, but you can get in it and drive it just about anywhere.
Right.
And it's going to cost you $4,000.
Right.
Whereas a super clean one right now, especially when you get into like a, what was it, the Z51? Or
Yeah,
the ZR,
yeah.
No, the ZR1s.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh,
You
yeah,
know,
the ZR1s are.
Some of them are pulling like $20,000 also.
I was gonna say, I wouldn't be surprised if they're a little bit higher.
Which is just as much as you're paying for a high-end C5.
Right. I feel like a ZR1 though is more of a collector car
It
because
definitely
they are
is.
so specific and so
Yep. And they've got
specialized
that.
in what they did with it.
They've got that super interesting engine that is just a small block with those Yamaha heads on it with the dual overhead
Lotus,
cams.
isn't it? It's Lotus heads.
Is it Lotus?
It's Lotus. It's not Yamaha.
Oh, I thought they were Yamaha
Nope,
heads.
they're
Okay,
Lotus.
so Lotus heads. Then.
Yep.
But regardless, you've got those super unique heads. So if you break that engine, it costs a lot to repair.
Right.
It's not just
Right.
your average small block. But short of something like that machine with the ZR1 Corvette in the C4s, you've got
Ralph.
things are relatively close in price from
Right.
something that is low end around that 4,000 mark up to like a later, like a 91, 92, 93.
Right.
You know, where they're under 10,000
Right.
for a super clean one.
Right.
But then, you know, jump into a C5 from like a later C4, you don't get a huge jump in horsepower.
No, you don't.
And there's very minimal chassis changes.
Right.
So realistically, I think that
I think your benefit of the
As long as
like
you-
the later C5 would be more the fact that you have the transmission placement. I'm trying to think of what it's called now.
transaxle.
Yeah,
It's
it's
just a regular
transaxle.
transaxle.
Yep.
Yep.
So I think that'd be your biggest benefit is that you just got a little bit better
Absolutely.
balance.
A little bit better weight balance. Yep. Yeah, for sure.
So now I'd go with the 240Z just because it's a classic Z car, and I mean, there's a lot of options for it. I mean, you could do anything with it. You could do an LS swap with it. I mean, the L24, L28, or L26, whatever you want to put in, is a capable engine. I mean, if I was going to go crazy, which would go well beyond the 10,000 ranges, you know, you can get an Osgeiken or OS Geiken, however you pronounce it, head, which is a dual overhead cam head
Sure.
for the cars, and that alone like costs like $10,000.
Yep.
So that'd be an interesting way to do it. But no, it's just one of those cars that has such a good amount of character and pretty straightforward baseline performance to make it fun. Wouldn't expect it to be anything crazy by any means, but it's one of those.
Right.
I just love to have one of those.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you know, being a C4 owner, the character concept is one thing that I really appreciate about that car. About that car is it's new enough that you expect it to have modern amenities because it is a later 80s
Right.
into the 90s. You're kind of like, oh, it's not that old.
Right,
It's not
right.
a classic
Right.
per se.
You don't think of it as a classic.
You don't think of it as a vintage car, we'll
Right.
say. It maybe is a classic, but it's certainly not, in most people's mind, a vintage car.
Yep.
So you're like, oh, well, this should be more like a modern car. But
Right.
then when you jump in it and drive it, you know, the steering is heavy, the brakes take a lot of effort, the clutch is heavy,
Right.
the throttle tip in is aggressive. Yeah. You know, that being said, it has the handling capabilities of a lot of modern cars.
Right.
So it kind of creates that balance between, it makes you get that raw feeling of a more vintage classic car,
Right.
while still having the actual capabilities of a lot of modern cars.
Right. And the last thing we talked about was basically the BRZ and the Prototype Z, and I really think the only thing to sum that up is when car manufacturers come out with a rear-wheel drive platform that's new, shut the hell up until you can drive it.
Right?
We all want more of that, so that's
Yep.
that's about it.
Got to
So,
keep them drivers' cars alive.
exactly,
And they are dwindling in numbers fast.
they are. So
Even like a lot of high-end cars that were typically manuals in the past are going to the wayside
Right.
for automatics, or even automated manuals, DSGs, things like that.
right.
So, which is cool in and of itself. I mean, I'm never going to discount a dual clutch
Right.
automatic transmission,
Right.
which is just a manual that's automated. I'm never going to discount that stuff, because as far as raw performance numbers,
Yeah, it's gonna be
they're
faster.
better.
Yep.
They're faster. They're quicker shift times. They have better 0 to 60 times, better quarter mile times, better acceleration around a track. Even a lot of stuff that has those DSGs or automated manual type transmissions. On your downshifts, they have auto blip and stuff
Right,
like that.
right.
It's hard to beat that kind of stuff when
Yep.
you're looking for all-out best road course track type numbers. But there's still nothing quite like rowing your own.
Rowing your own. All right, and I think that's where we'll leave it until next time. So thanks
Absolutely.
for listening, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Yeah, hope to see you again.
All right, have a good one.
Thank you.